Hello and welcome to the Delta E webinar on social or peer comparisons, part of the Energy Consumption Insights toolbox. We'll be discussing what makes a compelling solution for energy customers that drives behaviour change. We've got a few people still coming in, so we might give it another sort of 30 seconds before starting. So just hang on and we'll be starting soon. Hello and welcome to the latest public webinar from Delta EE. In this webinar, we'll be focusing on one part of the Energy Insights toolkit, and that's social comparisons. So that's the tool to benchmark energy use against a peer group amongst residential customers. And we'll be asking what makes a well-designed and compelling solution that drives behaviour change. Thank you for joining us. We know it's been a difficult few weeks for many in the industry, and priorities for many energy retailers have shifted, sometimes to short-term survival. So we appreciate you making the time for this. We believe that social comparisons are actually one of the tools that can help reduce the impact of the current high gas wholesale prices. And that's because social comparison tools can encourage customers to reduce consumption or shift consumption to greener and less expensive times of day. So today we'll be sharing some of the recent research highlights and some of our thinking in how to develop social comparison tools that bring that sustained customer engagement and behaviour change. So I'm David Stravithick, Principal Analyst at Delta EE, and I'm joined today by Suzhong Zhang in Paris. Hello, Suzhong.
Yeah, hi, David. Good morning, everyone.
Hi. Together, we manage the Energy Insights Plus research service, which helps our clients understand how energy consumption data can help drive customer engagement, energy efficiency, and bring value to energy companies and their customers. A little bit of housekeeping. The webinar should take around 45 minutes, including some time for your questions. So you can ask questions in the software, and we'll try and answer them during the course of the webinar where we can. It's usually a test of my multi-skilling capability. If we don't get to them through the course of the webinar, we'll try and address them at the end, or even if we don't get to them, I can always give you a call back afterwards to talk through that. So do write questions in where you can, that's great. And this webinar is being recorded and slides will be available at the end of the session. So what we're going to cover today. As the energy transition accelerates, energy companies are focusing more and more on residential customer engagement and behaviour change on their paths to net zero. And social or peer comparisons are quite common in energy insights apps in Europe today. But current solutions, we believe, could do more to better engage those customers. So we'll be discussing what social comparison tools are and how they work. We'll talk through some of the key challenges in designing compelling social comparisons tools, and we'll introduce 4 key design elements that should work seamlessly together to create a solution that really drives that customer engagement, energy efficiency, and we believe value creation. So with that, I'll hand over to Suzhong for the first section around what are social comparison tools and how do they work.
Yep, thanks for the introduction, David. We're going to start with the definition of social comparison. So what are social comparisons? So basically, in general, social comparison is a tool that benchmarks someone against a reference group of people. So it compares you with another group of people. Yeah, David can click on, yeah. So it shows that it comes from a behavioral science theory. And of course, now today, there are many different models that complete the theory, but basically it shows that we as human beings, we evaluate part of our motivation, our goals, and our behaviors by comparing ourselves with other people in the society. Therefore, many industries are applying this theory to their customer services, and especially for customer engagement, because it can be a tool to stimulate engagement with the mainstream customers. As it draws on our natural interest in other people's behavior, what they think of us, we tend to conform what the society expects us to do, and we tend to copy the behavior of people who are considered as good examples. Could you move to another slide, please? So what does that mean for energy? In the energy world, typically these theories have developed a service which compares consumers' energy consumption against other people's consumption. And the other people here could be similar households, your neighborhood, the community, or even just average households. This could be an insight, but to deliver this insight, of course, customer interface is necessary. So today, an energy insights tool, such as a web portal or a mobile app, is the most common interface to deliver social comparison insights. On the left hand, you can already see a very typical social comparison example. It compares customers' historic energy consumption with the average households and the most efficient households. So basically, why are energy companies sending social comparisons to their customers? On the right hand, you'll be able to see that basically with all those insights, customers don't have to understand the complicated relationship between kilowatt hour and their cost. They just need to understand their position in the society, comparing them with the other peers. And therefore, this provides a very good opportunity to engage the mainstream customers, even they have lower interest in their energy consumption. And it has become a very common feature for energy insight services today. We have analyzed around 70 energy insights apps from European energy retailers, and we found that 30% of these apps have already providing social comparisons. So it's becoming more and more common for energy insights products to provide social comparisons. So yeah, just a very brief introduction of what social comparison is and why energy companies are applying it to their customer services. Yep, I think I'll stop here and hand over back to you, David.
Great, thank you. We're going to do a quick poll actually before we sort of launch into our views. It'd be good really to get your opinion on where you see social comparison tools at the moment in Europe. So there's a question. I'm going to launch the poll, but there are some answers there. So single choice. Are current social comparison tools out there in the market? Are they awesome, nearly perfect? Are they good and seeing positive results? They're not bad, but needs further development. Or should we start again as they're not working as intended? So what I shall do is launch the poll. So hopefully on screen you can now see that poll. Yes, I can see answers already coming in, so that's great. So I'll just give that a moment. And now I'll just discuss the outcomes, what people think. Right, just give it another few seconds. Cast your last votes. Great, okay, I think most people have probably voted now. So I close that and share the results. Hopefully you can now see that on screen. So that yes, most people think not bad, but needs further development, which I would have to say is where we think that be at as well. I think in a way they're well placed in answering some of the engagement needs of customers, and they've been around for a while. And to be honest, that's sort of satisfactory in answering some of those challenges. But I think they're yet to adapt to the changing energy retail market, particularly around incorporating the time of consumption, which will be increasingly important. And we think about engaging on perhaps a deeper level that are basics of data-led communication. But we'll talk through our thinking on that. So it's interesting just to see from yourselves, which consider an informed audience, it's good to understand your thinking on that, and in fact it's fairly similar to ours. So I'll hide that, and hopefully we can get back to the slide deck. And then we can sort of move on. So what are the key challenges in designing compelling social comparison tools? So I'll pass back to Suzanne for this section.
Yeah, thanks, David. If you can move to this slide, please. Thank you. And yeah, in order to understand the complexity and the challenges that a social comparison service might have when those insights are delivered to end users, we have prepared 3 different types of energy customers here. So customer A is a very common family of 4 living in an old house with poor energy efficiency. Customer B is single, is interested in energy, so we call him energy engaged. Is living in a modern flat with medium energy efficiency. And customer C is a couple who have already invested in a new energy asset, so electrical vehicles, and have subscribed to a time of use tariff. And basically, from the left to the right, the energy engagement level for each customer grows from low to high. So what will they react when they received a social comparison, a typical social comparison? Now, okay, so everyone, we mentioned the 3 types of customers. They have received these most common social comparison examples on the left hand. They might come up with very different questions to challenge the result. Customer A might think that, okay, we are a family of 4. We find we are lagging behind many other families. They want to improve their energy efficiency, but they may feel discouraged because they have less time to look after these. And what's more, the information they get here are not full enough for them to understand how to improve their energy efficiency, because the social comparison here doesn't provide any suggestions for them to improve their position. What will customer B receive? Okay, because he lives in a modern flat, perhaps the insulation or the energy consumption is better than the average, but his position won't change over time. So he might feel discouraged because he remains at the same level over time, and soon he will lose his interest. And then the customer engagement will break. And for customer C, who have already invested in electric vehicles, they think that, okay, the first thing I see from the social comparison is kilowatt hour for me. But actually that's irrelevant because we have subscribed to a time of use tariff. I might have consumed a lot of energy during the off-peak time, but that doesn't mean that I have more energy cost or energy consumptions than the other people. So I want to understand, without EV, what else can I reduce my energy bills, and what is more relevant to me? So basically, you can see that there will be different questions or challenges from different types of customers, and how to consider all those complexity, how to use, is there any tools that can resolve those problems before we deliver those insights to the end customers? Yeah, I think David will show some of the 4 categories of tools that we can use for developing a compelling social comparison service in the following slides.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. I will, and we'll also come back to those customer types and hopefully answer and respond to those challenges that they place with social comparisons. Just a reminder, you can ask questions in the software as we go through. We're now going to go through the sort of 4 design elements individually to start with, and then think about how they all connect together. So the first of the 4 design elements is what is a similar home? It's about the Cohorts classification. But what is a similar home actually throws up more questions, like which data points are used to make that assessment, or how is that data sourced, and how good is that? How reliable is that data? What are the number of cohorts or the number of people within each cohort? So there's a lot really to consider within this that needs to be kind of thought through. There's a lot that goes into these cohort classifications, and much is actually sort of hidden behind dynamic clustering models. So sometimes it's difficult to be prescriptive. So what we'll do here is share some of the tips from our research around this sort of cohort architecture. So firstly, it's important to use variables that are appropriate for your market and customer base. So if you take Italy or Spain as a country example, for instance, you might have in the north of the country higher use of electric heating, and in the south higher use of air conditioning. So their location and their loads of electricity are quite important variables perhaps to feed into those models in those countries. Cohorts have got to be easily identifiable and resonate with customers. So perhaps a detached home with an elevation of 500 meters or more might be a perfectly reasonable cohort. But will the customers actually see themselves as belonging to such a group? And if they can't, then they won't be engaged in the social comparisons. The appropriate number and size of cohorts is important as well. You need robust enough sample sizes for those individual groups so they're not too volatile, but small enough to allow movements of individuals within them. So it's a bit of a numbers game to determine a good solution. And it will, of course, vary by the size of the customer base or the number of participating customers in this. But you can see how this can quickly build up to have 100 or more different cohorts when you start building in dynamic clustering. There's a comment sort of coming in around GDPR actually, and the need to get customer consent to use the data for comparison. And yes, that's the case certainly with smart meter data and more granular data. Those consents are needed. But if you can show the value of such a solution, this is what you could get in your Energy Insights Toolkit if you provide this consent, is a way perhaps of bringing more people in. But yeah, it's definitely true that not the entire customer base will have access to this unless they're doing it themselves, for instance, from their own, well, they can't do it for themselves anyway, from meter reads. So yeah, you should definitely need a customer consent. So the next one is around the treatment of outliers. So customers with very high or very low consumption can skew results. So we need a plan to cope with that. So to be compared perhaps with a customer with a cannabis farm in their garage, that's likely to skew the results and appear more favourable to others in that cohort. And they're not likely to tell you they've got a cannabis farm in their garage as well in a customer survey. So outliers are sort of typically excluded from calculations, but it might be worth just reviewing that because there can be some indications of an important criteria that might actually suggest a new cohort is needed. So for instance, if you see very low consumption out of season for a holiday home, that might suggest a holiday home might be a good cohort to have. And then around future proofing, customers must be able to change clusters, in a life event, so home move, arrival of a new baby, for instance. This obviously can be triggered perhaps by dynamic clustering from data you already have, but it might be that the customers need to trigger that change by alerting you of their changed circumstances. So they need to be able to do that. But what does all this mean in practice? Well, here are a table really of sort of data types and sources. If you look at the sources, most solutions focus on three main data sources. You've got your smart meter data, you've got existing customer data that an energy retailer might hold, and you've got the customer input they do themselves. The smart meter data can identify some of the large electricity loads, electric heating, hot water, EV smart charging, for instance. It's not alone, it's not enough. Customer data can be very useful, and companies can sit on excellent data there. It really depends on the quality of that. We mentioned the location, for instance, that could determine the climate zone. Tariff data could be important as a determinant for a cohort. Over energy, for instance, they split up those gas customers and those with dual fuel, so gas and electricity. So there's lots of different bits of data there that can help feed into a cohort architecture. But all this is generally not enough, and it's like there's still lots of gaps. So typically, energy retailers will look to their customers to fill in some of those gaps. And most do this, examples being Green, Yellow, Fortum, Volterra as examples. And they usually do this through surveys, customer surveys, or home profiles in their web portal, for instance, or an app that they can update. And the typical metrics that are included are the number of occupants in a property, the size of the property, the type of the property, if it's detached or flat, for instance, the heating source, the primary heating source is another major one. And all those things can be difficult often to get from smart meter data or customer data that the energy company holds, and therefore is reliant on customer input there. So really it's this blend of data points from these different data sources that usually feeds in as the input to cluster analysis to determine the right of number and size of those cohorts. So if we go on to the next question, so that's the cohorts. What about the metrics? What actually are we trying to measure? Kilowatt hours is the most commonly used option here, but it's not necessarily the only option. Each have their own advantages and disadvantages. So I'll talk through a lot of these in turn. So firstly, the kilowatt hours. It's easy to implement. I say the most common. Most solutions have this, in fact, but it doesn't take into account the time of consumption, which is perhaps its biggest drawback going forward. Cost is another one. It's engaging. People care about their bills, particularly in today's volatile market. In that sense, it's actually quite a good metric. But does it work for everyone? If, for instance, you're rolling off a cheap fixed tariff going on to an expensive variable tariff, unless my cohort actually matches the times of my tariff change, that may not actually be very relevant. And also, there's a lot of fixed cost elements to an energy bill, such as how much is controllable by the customer. There's a lot of that is not actually controllable. So there's a few question marks over cost, but still possible, and that's done. Another one is around carbon emissions, which aligns very well with net zero agendas, but can be more confusing than kilowatt hours, particularly when customers on green tariffs are advised then to shift consumption to greener times of day. That feels a bit odd for many. But there are other metrics beyond these three principal ones. One is a multiple of them. So Igloo, unfortunately, actually was one of the companies that suffered in the energy crisis. They actually ceased trading yesterday, but they used a mixture of these metrics. They use kilowatt hours and cost. So that can add a bit of agility. You can choose the metric that's most suitable. It adds customer choice. It can overcomplicate potentially, and it doesn't actually get rid of the underlying challenges of the other metrics either. A breakdown of comparison is another option. These do actually sort of remove some of these earlier issues. So CO2 per kilowatt hour, for instance, that factors in the time of consumption, or the cost in peak time, or disaggregated social comparisons start to direct customers about where they can make improvements. And the final one here is a rating, an energy score, perhaps out of 5. This sort of concept is familiar and easy to understand. It's also very adaptable because you can control what lies beneath that rating. So for instance, you could have customers on a time of use tariff, and the underlying metric of that rating is actually cost, whereas a fixed tariff customer could be around kilowatt hours. That's invisible to the customer, but they see the rating, and that can be adapted as they change tariffs. So this is becoming quite a clever way of future-proofing. But whereas the other metrics are quite factual, this brings in an element of judgment. So you need to handle that with a little bit of care.
David,
Right.
we have a question here regarding all those metrics, whether there is a priority of those metrics. Do you have a preference of all those metrics here?
Yeah, good question. I mean, as you can see, I've got examples of companies that operate under those metrics. So each are in the market now. Each are possible in the market. My preferred ones are probably, say, kilowatt hours is the most common. My preferred ones are probably those last two, the breakdown and the rating. You know, I've given their advantages, but I think actually a combination of the two probably is a great way of doing it. So actually having an energy score or energy rating that can then be broken down further, because that actually reduces that judgmental feel. So it could be received a little bit better. So if I give an example, if I receive, say, a score of 6 out of 10, I might think, oh, I thought I was going to get a 7. I feel that's a bit judgmental. But actually, if it breaks that down to say, it gives me great recognition for scoring 8 out of 10 on certain factors, but actually, you know what, it's the heating that brings my score down, and that's 5 out of 10. But actually, with some tips I could bring that up to 6 or 7 out of 10 next month, then that feels sort of less judgmental, and you find more on the customer side. So to me, I think it's probably that mixture of the breakdown and the rating together, I think is quite a powerful combination. Question coming in, actually, what do customers prefer? Good question. It's not something we've actually checked. In terms of the numbers of customers using some of these are low, but we don't have an answer to that. We know kilowatt hours and CO2 are difficult to understand and interpret, but the beauty of social comparisons is that actually, in a way, it bypasses that need to understand. Cost, we know, is engaging. So I think if you ask customers direct, so I think perhaps cost would probably come out as their top reason. They like bill transparency and they like bill reduction. So things in costs would definitely be good. But they're very familiar with ratings. Think of Trustpilot, Amazon. People are very familiar with ratings. It's a shortcut. So I think customers, if you give them a choice, they'd probably say cost and rating as the two most powerful. But as I say, it's not necessarily what they think. It's kind of what sits behind that, and how that can be used to engage. So if you can make that engaging and give them direction how to improve their situation, I think that would be useful. Okay, I think I'll move on to the next area, which is around engagement. So how do we drive action? And there are two things here. Firstly, we need to drive motivation itself. And that can be done in 3 ways. Reference points, which is what social comparisons is all about. You're comparing yourselves to a cohort, an average of the cohort, for instance. The care needs to be taken if you're below average, for instance, or below a reference point, that could demotivate. And if you're above the average, or people can actually then ease up because they think they're doing well. So a lot of companies use not just an average reference point, but perhaps an aspirational one as well. So the most efficient, the top 20%. So the ways of looking at that. But of course, those reference points can be determined, but by yourselves in the design of this. So you could actually have a reference point that is what's achievable for this group, a little bit more than they're currently doing, with some advice to get there, for instance. Norms is another one. Typically, static descriptive norms are the standard sort of comparison. So how did you compare to your cohort last month in one figure? So that's a fairly standard one, but other norms that demonstrate expected behaviour, like sort of smiley faces, thumbs up signs, those sorts of things that they're called injunctive norms. They can be used as well, really, to try and nudge customers into action. So that can definitely motivate, and they're quite common, used by companies like Eni, Protergia, Tibber, and others. And then you could look at other types of norms, sort of dynamic norms, look at sort of trending. So what's happening now, for instance. And that brings us on to timeframes as the third element here, which is an interesting one because you can play around with those. So rather than just looking at a static month, you could actually look at progress over time. You could, are you in the top half for 3 consecutive months? Then you might want to keep that going, keep that streak going. So you can play around with those timeframes as well, which can drive motivation. But then we want to drive action. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. Generally, information doesn't drive action, but it can do. As I think I've alluded to earlier, if you break down a social comparison, perhaps by time of day of week, or the disaggregated social comparisons that green yellow offer, it can tell you, it's the weekends, it's peak time, it's my heating. They're the areas that need the improvement. Then that information can help drive action. And then there's interaction for companies, for customers too. So that can be done through sort of energy efficiency knowledge quizzes and that sort of thing that Protergia do, or sort of target setting to get customers to actually take ownership, for instance, of a target that they can try and reach to drive that action. So that's all about action, but it's not just about a one-off bit of action. You also need to sustain engagement to create those and develop those good habits over time. So there's something called the habit loop. That's a model that James Duhigg has introduced around the concept of a cue, a routine, and a reward. This isn't, he doesn't look at this in the energy market, but it can be adapted for that. It just feels like habits are born out of this loop of you get a cue, you act on it, and you rewarded for it, then you get more likely to have that cue again and act on it. So as an example, in social comparisons, you could have, for instance, the cue could be the new month's information. So the cue then would have perhaps the results of the past month, with an opportunity to build in sort of next best actions for the coming month. If that's really clear, relevant and actionable for the customer, they're likely to take that on and actually act on it, which is the routine, and then they get rewarded at the back of that, which doesn't necessarily be a financial reward, although it could do, badges and points and whatnot, but it can just be, a smiley face, something like that, a bit of just something to feel good about, a recognition or reward of doing something, of progressing on your targets, for instance, and that can then be built into the cue that then inspires action for the next month. It doesn't have to be done monthly, of course. If it's a frictionless experience, you could bring in projections where they're going, dynamic tracking, so they can always see how they're doing on that. So you can actually reduce the length of that loop and keep that going, because it takes repetition to build that habit. The idea being, once you've built that routine and built that sustained engagement through habits, you've got this sort of virtual circle of engagement that then leads to value creation. So, customers will keep motivation levels high, and that then creates positive customer satisfaction and advocacy, NPS scores. Customer stickiness can then lead to higher customer retention, and good customer habits lead to positive customer value and trust, which then could lead to greater openness for new energy products and services. So there's then potential upsell opportunities there. So that's the thinking behind that sustained engagement. So what does it mean in practice? Going back to those 3 customer types and their sort of principal challenges, we could address all of them, but let's look at 3 challenges they have and how the social comparisons could work with this in mind. So you've got that. Firstly, let's go for the customer A, which is the family in their the time-pressed family in a home with poor energy efficiency. So I suggest here a really clear energy score broken down into categories like heating, cooking, entertainment. And this alone will start to point to where they can improve relative to their cohort. And then if you link that with personalized advice about how to improve, that can be of real value to these customers. They can then address, their lives, so they can address the areas of their lives and their home that have the biggest impact on that energy score. And once they've tackled them, then the next best ones they can tackle. So it creates that sustained sort of momentum of behavior change. For the energy engaged who's kind of losing interest because he's in an efficient small flat, there's not much more he can do, he's done all the quick wins and his position in the cohort doesn't seem to change, so he's losing interest. Well, rather than looking at a kilowatt hour metric, you could open it up, so you could use sort of CO2 emissions to open up then the time of use, and then that suddenly brings in a lot of new opportunities to shift that consumption to greener and cheaper times of day. We can also introduce target setting here to get this customer to commit to a new area of behavior change, together with sort of performances over perhaps different timeframes to keep them motivated each month. So again, you're developing that habit over time. And then the third customer, the sort of dual EV household, there could be two metrics actually work for them to help them in their sort of ambitions to make good use of their static time of use tariff and play their part in protecting the environment. And those metrics then around cost for the time of use tariff and CO2 per kilowatt hour. So it's that sort of breakdown of the kilowatt hour. And results you could look at based on time bands of the time of use tariff. So this is now highly relevant to them, and they can see how they can impact things. And you could explore ways perhaps here of optimizing their EV assets to further improve their ranking in the social comparisons. By bringing in upsell opportunities through optimization services or demand-side flexibility. So then it's both a win-win for them and the energy system. There are other ideas in there as well. I've just selected one or two for each one, and I'm sure there's a lot more behind this as well. But I wanted really just to get across the concept of how you bring the different design elements together in this sort of virtuous loop of value creation for the customer, and then hopefully for the company on the back of that as well. So very quickly, a sort of checklist of this based on the sort of the research that we've done. Solutions should be personalized and relevant, transparent for the customer, so really easy to understand, should help them move from sort of data-led information to action. They need to be motivational or inspirational to keep those customers engaged and keep them coming back to create that stickiness, and future-proof, so they can work in different scenarios, such as a price jump, as we're seeing at the moment, but also that they can develop into positive long-term solutions. So there's got quite a lot I took you through there. I'll pause there and just have a quick look at questions and the time. We've probably got time for a few minutes of questions. Just see if there's ones we've not covered yet.
Yeah, we have a question around how actions can be measured. So, for example, how many people change something, change their behaviors, their settings. David, I can expand a little bit on this, but happy if you can. Yeah,
no, good. That's fine.
Yeah, I think there are several ways, several approaches that you can measure these customers' behavior changes. For example, gamification mechanism is a good one. For example, you can set them some like daily challenges, some suggestions for them to do per day, but you also send them something to tick, and they can send you a feedback whether they did it or not. And then it's another opportunity for you to send them the result of their behavior changes the next month. Then you can tell them, okay, because of your behavior, how much energy has been saved, how much cost have been saved. So it's like extending your customer engagement. And alongside the gamification, if you also have a disaggregation engine, that would also be useful. So you don't have to interact so many of it with the customers, but you can use the disaggregation to show them what category or which device of the energy consumption has been saved. So yeah, just creating more interactions or engagement opportunities with customers. Yeah, so that is what I think you can measure or monitor the customers' behavior changes.
Great, thanks. We've also got a question coming in around, so an earlier question actually, around what types of products are common in different markets. And I think, I mean, social comparisons tools can exist throughout Europe, you know, from to the north and the Nordics down to the south and to Spain and Greece, and from west, you know, UK through to east in sort of Latvia, Greece and the like. So it kind of, they exist everywhere to some degree. And, you know, companies are innovating within there. In terms of what products are interesting, it all depends really on your customer base and market. But, you know, one retailer, for instance, is investigating time of use tariff cohorts. Another is looking at disaggregated social comparisons, but we've mentioned that already. Another is rewarding customers who improve their social comparison standing. So there are lots of innovation in different markets. I think it's working out what's right for your market, your customer base, your company, you know, your own you know, expertise as well in that company, where that needs to be brought in. So there's lots of factors to think about, but yeah, to think about the customer at the heart of this and build it around those solutions. I think that's the key thing to think about there. But you know, hopefully, you know, I've shown that thinking about this as a package together and bringing in the different design elements together for a, you know, a bigger, better solution, I think is the way to think about this. Okay, there are one or two quite specific questions coming in. I might sort of pick up with them separately, if that's okay. Just conscious of time. We said we'd finish. Yeah, we said we'd finish at 1:45. So I think if there are any final questions, so do keep them coming, and we'll try and respond to you after the webinar. Well, I think for now we'll just do a couple of final slides as a close to this. Firstly, to highlight our Energy Insights Plus work. For those that aren't aware of it, we have this research service, which is the team that brought you this webinar, and we research a range of topics on energy insights, from disaggregation, real-time, commercial value of energy insights. We cover data sets on energy insights, products, and smart meter enabled customer solutions. So there's all sorts of stuff all related to this area. So do get in contact with us if you want to know more about this, particularly if you're interested in commercial value of energy insights, which is a topic we're currently exploring. And also a bit of a promotion to the Talking New Energy podcast. If you're not familiar with that, it's very popular, so do check that out. And it covers a vast spectrum of topics around the energy transition. So if you missed the webinar earlier this week as well on the future of flexibility, you can download those slides from the Delta E website. So there's lots of free content there to look at. So that just leaves me, I think, to say thank you for attending and participating in the webinar. We'll get back to any of those final questions later. We really appreciated the time you provided, and hope you found that useful. A reminder that the slides and recording are available if you need to revisit that or share with colleagues. And as I say, we will try and reach out directly to those people we haven't got around to responding to their questions. So feel free to get in contact to continue the conversation. We're always welcome further discussion and challenge. So thank you, and we hope to see you sometime soon.
Thank you, everybody.